everyone, welcome back to my channel. I just used all of my Stardust maxing Pokemon from Master League Premier, and you know what? I have no regrets whatsoever because I absolutely love maxing Pokemon. I just need an excuse to do it, and finally I got one. Master League Premier is around, and I've been saving my resources for forever. I've been saving up the Excels and the Stardust, obviously, and now I just maxed a bunch of Pokemon in one go, and I have a bunch of shiny new Pokemon that I get to try out in GBL. I will honestly never understand the people who will save up a bunch of resources in Stardust and then never end up using it. Like, it's a game. Just do it. Half the fun is maxing out a Pokemon and then having something interesting, hopefully, to use in battle. And if you're not doing that, you're missing out. Trust me. If you're in the middle of considering whether or not you should build a Pokemon right now, I'm gonna tell you, go for it and don't be afraid to try it out in GBL. The only way you are going to learn how to play PvP is if you practice. Practice, practice, practice. You can't be afraid of losing. You also can't be afraid of investing a little bit of Stardust here and there. But of course, only if you have like decent IVs. There is one Pokemon I built here that is not the greatest, but I really wanted to try it. And also I've been saving the Excels for it, so I have enough to build another one if I get a better one in the future. So like here, I was about to build this Bergmite, and then I thought maybe I can wait for a potential event where we can evolve them into the Hisuian form. I would much rather have that one, but I went ahead and I maxed a shiny Hisuian Avalugg, which is not the best, but it's okay. It's a 93. It does have 14 attack, which means I am going to suffer in the mirror match, unfortunately. But I just want to have fun. So I went ahead and I built all these Pokemon, and today I am going to show you guys a team that worked way too well for me. I climbed around 150 points with this team. I had dropped a lot in Great League trying a bunch of Spice, and this team today I went so positive with. It is very solid. The team is going to be Florges on the lead with Annihilape as a safe swap and Skeleturge as a closer. I like to use Annihilape as a safe swap because it is really good at drawing out those Gyarados. Of course, you could draw out a Fairy type and then that's just unfortunate, but most of the time Annihilape is going to be drawing out that Gyarados, and Annihilape actually does pretty well against Gyarados. Obviously, you don't want that aligned to your Skeleturge because it is a water type and it is going to be destroying Skeleturge. But if you can draw that out with the Annihilape, then Skeleturge will have the potential to sweep in the back. Now this team is inspired by a team that I recommended yesterday, where I recommended Florges with Snorlax and Skeleturge in the back, and then Snorlax was a safe swap. On paper, that team is a lot better than this one because this one has a very glaring weakness to opposing Skeleturges. But if I had been using Snorlax as a safe swap in place of Annihilape, then I don't think I would have gotten the wins that I got today, because I was running into a lot of Gyarados and Annihilape backlines, and using Annihilape to draw out the Gyarados, obviously my opponent isn't going to want to swap in their own Annihilape into an Annihilape that has an energy lead because they're going to lose that matchup. So they bring in the Gyarados for that, and then when I get the Gyarados out of the way, then Skeleturge is going to be able to sweep whatever is in the back. So that was working out for me, whereas if I had the Snorlax, I think Snorlax would have just drawn out the Annihilape, and then that Gyarados would have still been aligned to my Skeleturge. The team is basically a Fairy type lead with 2 answers in the back to Steel types, and it is going to be very weak, unfortunately, to Skeleturge, which I am starting to see more and more people use, but when I was playing, I didn't see a lot of it, so I was taking advantage of the fact that not a lot of people were using Skeleturge. Obviously, the biggest pitfall for this team is safe swapping Annihilape and then drawing out a Fairy type, but I can't think of a single safe swap in this meta that is going to be good against everything. So with that in mind, let's get into these battles. I have some really good ones for you guys today. Up first, you guys are going to see why I absolutely love this team. It's because we get a really bad lead and we are going to be able to flip this match in our favor. My opponent led Magnezone, which is a really bad lead for us. I immediately swap into my Annihilape, and thank goodness my opponent actually brings out the Gyarados. It has Waterfall, unfortunately, which is going to be hurting my Annihilate, but I decide to go ahead and shield one of the Aqua Tails because I want to land a Shadow Ball. Actually, here, I was still experimenting with the team and trying to figure out how it works. Now I play this matchup a little bit differently. I will not shield Annihilate up against Gyarados, and I will save both shields for Skeleturge. And actually, in this instance, I would have really benefited from having both of those shields for my Skeleturge because my opponent is going to have, again, that Annihilate in the back. I was telling you guys I was running into so many Gyarados and Annihilate backlines. So if I had an extra shield here, I would have been able to take the Annihilate out with my Skeleturge, and then I would have even had enough energy on Skeleturge to take the Magnezone out. But my opponent is half health on the Magnezone, so I'm going to go for a Moonblast, and then I just need to reach a Disarming Voice and hope that this is enough to take the Magnezone out. Remember, Magnezone is super squishy, so I'm able to take Magnezone out with my Florges, and we're able to take that win. GG's to our opponent. Moving on to the next battle, we are going to see a really nice lead of Dragonite, and my opponent is going to safe swap into their Excadrill. I am, of course, going to bring in my Annihilate and not going to bring in Skeleturge because remember, Excadrill is going to be able to hit for super effective with those Drill Runs and the Rock Slides up against the Skeleturge. So I bring Annihilate, and I also go for the Shadow Ball because I didn't want to take another move from the Excadrill. I'm going to go for another Shadow Ball here now up against Dragonite, and we get them into the yellow. I'm expecting my opponent to have another Steel type in the back. Dragonite double Steel, this is a very common team. It turns out they have that Metagross in the back, and I am going to easily take that win. GG's to our opponent, but that was a very RPS match in my favor. Moving on to the next battle, we see that really nice Dragonite lead, but then my opponent safe swaps into a Gyarados with Waterfall, and I really want to get some health off of this Gyarados before I swap out into my Annihilate, so I bait with the Disarming Voice first because I was calling that my opponent might shield it, but they go ahead and they also shield my Moonblast, so they invest both shields on this Gyarados, and that's not going to be good for me. I am going to go for a Shadow Ball now with my Annihilate up against this Gyarados, and we get it into the red, but then my opponent swaps into a Charizard, which is also not going to be great for me. I go ahead and I shield the Dragon Claw only because I reach that Shadow Ball, and I really need to get this damage off because this Charizard is going to give me such a hard time. I'm now going to bring in Skeleturge and farm the Charizard down. Hopefully I should only take one move from it. We do. We take a Blast Burn, and now I have energy for whatever my opponent is going to bring in. They bring Dragonite, and I know that my opponent has a move stored on Gyarados, so I brought in Florges to force them to throw their energy, and then I'm just going to farm down with Skeleturge. I was really hoping here that 2 Disarming Voices would be enough to take the Dragonite out, but I realized it wasn't going to be enough, and I wasn't sure if the Shadow Ball would KO, so I went for one more Incinerate, and then I tried to throw the Shadow Ball, but unfortunately they were able to Dragon Breath us down. I should have just thrown the Shadow Ball because maybe it would have taken the Dragonite out and I had it ready, but I thought I could throw one more Incinerate and I would be able to survive the Dragon Breaths, but unfortunately I was wrong. So we take a loss there. Up next, we get a really nice lead of Haxorus, and I got some really good leads in this entire set. I think they were all dragons, and I'm running Florges on the lead. And my opponent safe swapped into a Primarina. I weakened the Primarina first with Florges before I swapped out into my Skeleturge, and then I farmed the Primarina down with Skeleturge, and I had a lot of energy. So my opponent actually brought in Gyarados instead of bringing in the Haxorus because they didn't want to take those Disarming Voices. But I was able, because I had so much energy on the Skeleturge, I was able to get the Gyarados very low, and then my opponent just gave up. Moving on to the next battle, we are going to see a Shadow Dragonite on the lead, another Dragon type, and my opponent safe swaps into a Shadow Gyarados. I have to stay in this with my Florges. Thank goodness it is running Dragon Breath and not Waterfall, because that means Florges is going to be resisting the fast move. So I could stay in there as long as I can to get this Gyarados low. I got it into the red, and then I can bring in Annihilate and just go for a Night Slash. They let it go, the Gyarados is now out of the way, and then they bring back in the Dragonite. I committed to the Shadow Ball so that I would force my opponent to throw their energy. They throw the Dragon Claw, and now I'm just going to wait my switch timer out because my switch timer is still not up. So if they have a Steel type in the back, my Florges is going to be switch locked into it. So unfortunately, I had to take the drill run on my Florges, and then I was able to bring in Skeledirge. Now, I decided not to shield Skeledirge because I know that I can survive a drill run, and I can also reach that Shadow Ball and take my opponent's final shield. And here I'm just planning on taking this win with Florges because I have so much energy built up on this. The Excadrill is in Disarming Voice range, so I'm able to take it out with Florges, and then my opponent is also not going to be able to reach a move on Dragonite, so I should be able to build up to the Moonblast and take the Dragonite out. GG's to our opponent. That is going to be another kind of RPS win. That's going to be our first for one with this team, but I have to say this first set was pretty easy because everyone was running Dragon type leads and I was able to RPS them in the back, so we are going to have to see some wins with some really bad leads. Up next, we see a Primarina on the lead and it's running Waterfall. Primarina with Waterfall is really bad for my backline, so I have to stay in this with Florges and try to do as much damage as I can. I'm counting on the fact that because they have the Fairy type in the lead, whatever my opponent has in the back, it might be weak to Annihilate. So I'm really hoping, and I'm going to save all my shields for my backline, that my Annihilate is going to be able to do really well against their backline. So I bring in Annihilate here and I am going to go for a full farm down up against a Primarina. I know that they can't get to another Disarming Voice, so I have all that energy built up and my opponent is going to bring in a Rhyperior, and if this is the best answer they have left on their team to Annihilate, then this is telling me that whatever my opponent's third Pokemon is, it is going to be weak to my Annihilate. So now here, I'm just hoping that this Shadow Ball is going to be enough to take the Rhyperior out. It's not because Rhyperior is very bulky, and it looks like my opponent is going to have an Ursaluna in the back. I kind of wish they had stayed in that match because I really want to see how the Skeledirge and Ursaluna matchup plays out. But they go ahead and they top left. I had a shield left, so I could have shielded their high horsepower. I was also resisting their fast move. Okay, moving on to the next battle, we are going to have a very terrible lead of Metagross. I am immediately swapping into Annihilate, and this is going to be one of those situations where Annihilate is going to draw out a Togekiss. They no-shield the Shadow Ball at least, and that gets them into the yellow. And then they also decide to throw their energy here, but they also get that really annoying Ancient Power boost, and that means I am not going to be able to farm them down completely with my Skeledirge before they can reach another Ancient Power. So I have to go ahead and invest a shield, really unfortunate for me, and my opponent is going to have a Dragonite in the back. I go for a Disarming Voice. Obviously, as we've seen before, 2 is not going to be enough to take this Dragonite out. I go for another one. We get a shield out of them, but then I swap in Florges, and it really doesn't look like I'm going to win this. I basically got RPS'd here. There are going to be some teams that you just can't do anything against, and this is going to be one of them. So I should just go ahead and top left here and save my time. Moving on to the next battle, we are going to see a really nice lead of Annihilate, and my opponent safe swaps into a Waterfall Gyarados. Uh-oh, this is not good. I'm gonna have to stay in this with my Florges and try to do as much damage as I can to the Gyarados before swapping out. Luckily, they no-shield that Moonblast. I take an Aqua Tail as well, and then I swap into my Annihilate. Now I can no-shield whatever my opponent is going to throw at me. They throw a Crunch, and then I'm going to throw the Night Slash before they can reach another move. They let Gyarados go. Now that's out of the way, and all 3 of the Pokemon I have left are going to be doing very well against my opponent's Annihilate. So I'm able to reach a Shadow Ball and take a shield from them. My opponent is going to have to throw a move in order to take my Annihilate out because those counters are going to be resisted. But the Night Slash that they throw is not quite enough to take us out. I'm able to reach a Night Slash of my own as well, and then I can bring in Florges. Now here I decide to shield up the Shadow Ball because I had that Disarming Voice. I'm going to go for it, and it gets them into the red. And then my plan was to immediately swap into Skeledirge and farm the Annihilate down, but my opponent simultaneously swapped into a Metagross, and once they saw the Skeledirge, they went ahead and they top lefted. Moving on to the next battle, it looks like we are going to get lucky with our lead again. We see an Annihilate, and my opponent swaps into a Florges. Skeledirge is absolutely going to wall Florges, so I bring it in, I go for that Shadow Ball, and then here I am going to go for a full farm down. I will be able to take another move from this, but they go for a Disarming Voice, probably going for 2 disarming voices. It's not going to be enough to take our Skeleturge out. We're going to live with quite a bit of HP, and then my opponent just top lefts. Okay, GG's. On to the next battle, we are going to see a Florges mirror match, and I actually like to soft lose this mirror match because I can then come in with my Skeleturge and farm the Florges down. So I do lose CMP in this instance. They go for a Moonblast. They also get the attack drop, which is unfortunate, but it is going to work in my favor because that means they will survive with more HP, and that is going to be more farm for my Skeleturge. They go ahead and they CMP tie me on the next move, and they take us out with a Moonblast. I can now bring in Skeleturge, take whatever they're going to throw at us, and then I'm able to get 2 Incinerates in and take the Florges out. My opponent is going to have a Snorlax in the back, so I immediately swap into my Annihilate, and then they swap into their own Annihilate, and because I'm ahead by a little bit of energy, I should be at an advantage here. Okay guys, bear with me. I've been trying to describe this for the past 10 minutes and I've been failing, but I baited, my opponent called my bait, and because they called my bait, I called that they weren't going to bait with the first move. So I shielded their Shadow Ball. My opponent no-shielded my bait, but then the next move I baited and they shielded that, and then the next move I threw the Shadow Ball, they shielded that, and because I was able to get both of their shields out of the way, I was able to come in with Skeleturge, which I knew had a Shadow Ball, and I was able to throw the Shadow Ball on the Annihilate immediately, and then my opponent top left. I hope I explained that well. I've been trying to explain this for the past 10 minutes, and I keep getting confused with my own explanation. Whatever, you guys get the point, but that's another positive set, another 4-1 with this team, and now we can move on to the next battle, where we are going to see a not-so-great lead. It is going to be Excadrill, and I am going to swap into the Annihilate, and I successfully draw out the Gyarados. This is exactly where we want to see it. I go immediately for that Shadow Ball, and we take a shield from my opponent. I can go ahead and no-shield this Aqua Tail, and I should be able to throw another Shadow Ball on the Gyarados. They go ahead and they no-shield it here. It's not going to be enough to take them out, but we get them into the red, and Florges should be able to farm this Gyarados down. Unfortunately, they are going to get 2 Aqua Tails off on Florges. This energy we've built up from farming down the Gyarados is going to come in handy later because they have the Excadrill, which is pretty squishy, and as we've seen, it doesn't take the moves from Florges very well, and my opponent is going to have that Annihilate in the back. As I said, a lot of Gyarados and Annihilate backlines, and because this time I saved both of my shields for my Skeleturge, I can go ahead and double shield here. My opponent has no shields left. I'm going to get them into Disarming Voice range, throw that Disarming Voice, and then I have a Shadow Ball ready for the Excadrill. I'm going to be able to get it into the yellow, and they should be in Disarming Voice range here as well. I have the move ready. I'm going to go ahead and throw it. I think I could have made it to the Moonblast, but the Disarming Voice is enough to KO the Excadrill, and we're able to take that win. Moving on to the next battle, we are going to see another Florges mirror match, and as we've seen before, I'm completely fine with losing CMP here because if I lose this matchup, I can come in with my Skeleturge and then farm the Florges down and have energy for whatever my opponent is going to have in the back. They also get another attack drop on the Moonblast. I'm getting all of the attack drops from my opponents with their Moonblasts for some reason. But that's fine. I'm going to let them take me out here, and then I am going to come in with my Skeleturge, farm this Florges down, take whatever they're going to throw. It's going to be resisted. It's fine. And my opponent this time, instead of letting me farm them down, they swap into an Annihilate, and they let the Shadow Ball go. So I'm going to go ahead and shield whatever this is, and they are in farm down range. I'm going to be able to farm them down. They threw a Night Slash, and they weren't able to get to another one, thankfully, because Night Slash is going to be super effective. My opponent has a Magnezone in the back. This is basically GG's. I have that Annihilate, which is absolutely going to destroy this Magnezone. I can easily take a Wild Charge if I wanted to. Their Florges was also 1 HP, so I was able to counter it down. They're going to go ahead and throw a Wild Charge here. Annihilate survives easily, and we're able to counter the Magnezone down and take that win. On to the next match, we are going to see another Steel type on the lead. It is going to be an Excadrill this time, and I swap into my Annihilate immediately. Again, drawing out that Gyarados is working really well for me, and I am going to go for that Shadow Ball, take a shield from them, which is perfectly fine, even better for my Skeledirge in the back. I'm going to no-shield the Aqua Tails, and this time my opponent doesn't want me to get the second Shadow Ball off, so they go ahead and they throw their move immediately. They take my Annihilate out, but Florges should be fine in this matchup because the Gyarados has Dragon Breath. So I'm going to be able to go for a Disarming Voice, and then I wanted to go for a full farm down there, but my opponent immediately swaps into a Metagross and switch locks themselves into my Skeledirge. I threw the Shadow Ball as soon as I got it because I didn't want my opponent to get to an Earthquake. We're able to take the Metagross out, and then my opponent is going to bring back their Gyarados in, and I'm going to go for a full farm down, double shield my Skeledirge, and I should have a lot of energy now for the Excadrill. They bring it in, I go for the Shadow Ball immediately and take their final shield, but I recognized that my opponent was going to be able to reach a Drill Run before I could reach another Shadow Ball. So I swap out, keeping in mind that I have a Disarming Voice loaded, and then I go for a Moonblast, and my opponent is in Disarming Voice range here. He needed to build up to 2 moves or farm my Florges down completely in order to take that win because I had a move ready on my Skeledirge. So I was able to reach a Disarming Voice on my Florges and take the Excadrill out. Moving on to the next battle, we are going to see a Florges mirror match, and as we've seen, I like losing this. So in this instance, I won CMP. So I go for that Moonblast, we get them into the yellow, and then this time I decide instead of going for the Moonblast, I'm going to go for the Disarming Voice, knowing fully well that it is not going to be enough to take the Florges out, but I really want to come in with my Skeledirge to get some energy. We get 1 Incinerate worth of energy. Hopefully this is worth it because my opponent is going to have a Gyarados in the back. I'm going to be able to reach a Shadow Ball, get them into the yellow, and then I can bring in my Annihilate. I'm going to go ahead and no-shield whatever this is. It's an Outrage, unfortunately for us, but my opponent has a Magnezone in the back. I'm going to be able to go for a Shadow Ball against the Magnezone, and then I also reach a Night Slash. If my opponent shields this, then they will have no shields left for Gyarados. I'm going to be able to farm them down with Skeledirge, invest 1 shield here. Because they're going to debuff themselves, that Incinerate is enough to take them out. They don't have any shields left for their Gyarados. I'm easily going to be able to go for either move. I think the Disarming Voice would have been enough to take them out, but I went for the Shadow Ball, and we're going to take that win. This is the last battle I have for you guys, and this was such an RPS game for me. My opponent's team exactly countered mine, but I had a chance to win this and I messed up. I think I had a chance to win this, and if I did one thing differently, I might have actually taken this win. Anyways, my opponent leads Metagross, which is a terrible lead for us, and I swap into my Annihilate and we draw out a Florges, but they don't shield the Shadow Ball. And because they didn't shield the Shadow Ball, I was able to get them really low. And then I also bait with a Night Slash and I take a shield from them and I get a boost with the Night Slash. So that's really good for me. I go for another Night Slash because their Florges was in Night Slash range as well. And we take their final shield from them. I then swap out into my Skeledirge and catch the move from Florges onto Skeledirge. And my opponent has a Waterfall Gyarados in the back. They're able to take us out with their Waterfall Gyarados. However, here, this is where I think I messed up. I should have just brought in Annihilate and farmed this Gyarados down. If I had a little bit of extra energy on this Annihilate, I would have been able to reach that Shadow Ball. I'm not sure if the Shadow Ball would be enough to KO the Metagross, but with the energy I had on Florges, I would have been able to reach a move and take the Metagross out, and their Florges was really low in the back, and I might have had a chance to win that game. But unfortunately, we are going to lose that. But that was still another positive set with this team, and overall, I'm really happy with how it performed. I should say, just watch out. If you're seeing a lot of Skeledirge, then I wouldn't recommend running this team. In the set that I played afterwards, I saw a few and I struggled a little bit, but the team is still pretty solid. But that brings us to the end of our video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys like my content, please consider subscribing. Maybe leave a like, it helps me out so much, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye!